Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome. So, why are we here? Well, we've come here tonight to share some information with you to begin the healing process and to hopefully give you some insights that will help you perhaps begin to understand what happened. Now, what I'd like you to really be able to try and hopefully understand is that we can't share with you a lot of information tonight. There's an ongoing prosecution, as you well might expect. And as such, we have to be very careful about the information we share. And I think you'll understand this because honestly, we don't want to do anything at all to jeopardize the prosecution of this case. But what we can share with you is some things that you may know or may not know. On the night of May 16th, Monday night, 3 armed men forcefully entered a home in the 1900 block of Washington Avenue. There was a violent struggle that ensued, and in that home, the residents, Jesse and Jessica, heroically and valiantly, in my opinion, defended themselves. There were serious injuries that were sustained. When the call went out at about 9 o'clock, police arrived within exactly 2 minutes of that call being aired. Now, the suspects were looking for drugs and money. They went to the wrong house. That night, we apprehended on scene 1 suspect, adult male. The next morning, very early in the morning, we apprehended 1 suspect, juvenile male. By Friday afternoon, we had apprehended female adult driver, suspect, and at large is still the 4th suspect. Now, I would imagine that many of you are wondering if they were in the wrong house, what was the right house? Right? What's the house they were looking for? I can't definitively answer that question for you. What I can tell you we did, in conjunction with the West Metro Drug Task Force and members of Pete's investigators, we conducted a canvass of the surrounding neighborhood, down from about Jackson up to Arapahoe, from about 19th to 20th, to attempt to see if we could identify what that house might be. Contacted a whole bunch of houses. People were very cooperative. We weren't able to identify a house that might have been the target. And what I can tell you from that is that we don't know for certain, and I'm not sure we'll ever know what house they were looking for. We don't know if it was on that street. We don't know if it was in that block. We don't know if it was in that half of the city. In fact, we don't know if it was even in the city of Golden. What I will tell you, and what I want you to know, is that I feel pretty darn confident that there is not a continuing threat to the neighborhood or to the community of Golden. You know, I live in Golden. Most of you here live in Golden. I presume all of you live in Golden, probably in or around that neighborhood. Golden is a great place to live, to raise a family, to work, to visit, to play. What I also want you to know is Golden is an incredibly safe community. But you know, sometimes bad things happen. You also need to know we are not necessarily immune from the environment that exists around us. But I also want you to know that home invasion crimes are incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. I've worked for the City of Golden Police Department 27 years. We have never had one in the City of Golden like this before. So you shouldn't live in fear. You shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't not continue with living your life the way you live your life here in Golden. You have what I believe is a great police department, great men and women that work for the police department. What do I expect you to get out of tonight? Well, I'll tell you that. You're going to hear from Pete Weir here in a few minutes, who's going to tell you just a little bit about the status of the case, and perhaps a little bit about, should these defendants be convicted, what they might expect to receive as punishment. You're going to hear from Jesse and Jessica. Now, I would ask that you and the members of the media in the back of the room respect their privacy. Part of the reason we're doing this is because they really wanted to talk to you, the community of Golden. But they're not going to take questions. They're not going to answer questions. They want to make a statement to you. And it's going to be short, it's going to be brief. And again, I'll reiterate, they're not going to take questions. Please don't be offended if sometime during the course of the night I might jump up and say we can't answer those questions. Because again, we're going to do everything we can to make sure the prosecution of this case goes unhindered. Then you're going to hear from Dr. Nicoletti, who's going to talk about shattered safety zones. You're going to find it to be fascinating. He's a world-renowned trauma expert, talks all over the country, all over the world about these kinds of things. He'll take a bunch of your questions. Lastly, you're going to hear from a couple of our police officers, Joe Page, Jodine Fowler, about home safety tips. And at the end, I'll wrap up a little bit, give you the city's webpage to go get some additional information. Sound good?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for whoever said that. All right. So now I'll introduce Pete Weir to say a few words.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening. You know, even in the worst circumstances, there are good things that happen. And I think tonight is an example of that. It gives all of us an opportunity to stop and pause and reflect. And what I think about is how fortunate we are. How fortunate we are to live in a community such as Golden, to live in Jefferson County. To echo part of what the Chief had to say, this is an extraordinarily safe community. You're blessed with an exceptional Police Department. The Golden Police Department does amazing work, not just in this case, but consistently. The kind of cases that are presented to my office are professional and very well done. You can take pride in that and take some comfort in that. Chief indicated that there's 4 individuals that we believe are involved in this incident. 3 of those individuals are in custody. The 4th one is at large. But to reiterate what Chief Kilpatrick indicated is that there's absolutely no cause for concern with respect to that 4th individual. He does not pose a risk to the citizens of Golden or to the citizens of Jefferson County. We have charged the individuals that we have in custody with a number of offenses. They include attempted second-degree murder, assault, and burglary. And my ethical responsibility mandates that I also indicate that, like any defendant charged with a crime, they enjoy the constitutional right of a presumption of innocence. And that presumption remains with the defendant unless and until we prove all the counts beyond a reasonable doubt. And that presumption will certainly rest with these 3 defendants. The process itself, unfortunately, usually is not quick. We would expect the time for the processing of this case, putting together the prosecution, affording the defendants all their constitutional rights, that we may not have an ultimate resolution in court until early next year, 6, 8 months, perhaps even longer. But our job is to protect the integrity of the case and get to the right result. You know, sometimes I'm asked, why are you a DA? Because you see some horrific things. You see some troubling things. But you know what? I also have the privilege of seeing some wonderful things and meeting some wonderful people in the midst of tragedy. I have the privilege of working with people of courage. And I think that what has happened in Golden highlights that. It's going to be our privilege and honor to be working with Jesse and Jessica all the way through and doing our best to ease this process as much as possible for them. This is also an opportunity to speak in broader terms about community safety. As you came in, and please, if you have a moment on the way out, stop at the tables that are outside. Present is Mike Harris, an investigator from my office. Mike is and I don't overstate this, a national expert with respect to internet safety, particularly as it applies to your kids. What measures can we take to make sure our kids are safe with all the interaction they do in social media? Because, folks, there are predators out there that want to take advantage of our children. And Mike and his team are doing an exceptional job of identifying, investigating, arresting, and ultimately we prosecute those individuals. Also, you'll see literature with respect to some of our fraud programs. My office puts a premium on protecting our most vulnerable citizens, which are the elderly and our kids. And unfortunately, many of the traits that make our senior citizens some of our most valuable citizens, honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, oftentimes get turned on them and make them particularly vulnerable to folks that want to take advantage of them. So you'll see some literature on the table that is addressed to those kinds of issues and the kind of fraud hotline that we have in the DA's office. And I also want to take this opportunity to put in a pitch for our Senior Law Day, which is coming up on Saturday. This Saturday, starting at 8:30 at Colorado Christian University. Goes from 8:30 to 1. Costs $10. For that, you get breakfast, you get lunch, and you get presentations and seminars. We average between 300 to 500 people that show up. And this is the entire spectrum of issues that we feel might be of interest to our elder citizens. It's not just focused on criminal aspects. We have 18 separate venues, if you will, from estate planning, conservatorship, fraud seminars, how to avoid scams, anything that may apply to someone that is looking at the issues that we all face as we get older. So if you're interested, if you have a parent that this might benefit, grandparent, please take a look at that and consider spending just a few hours with us on Saturday. I think you'd find it very, very meaningful. This is a marvelous community. Golden is a special place, and what has happened here should not diminish that in the slightest. This is a safe community. It's a wonderful place to live, to raise family, and to just spend time with friends. And I think it's a testament to the community that you all took time out tonight to come and listen to what the Golden Police Department has to offer. But even more than that, I suspect many of you are here to show support for Jesse and Jessica. And on behalf of the DA's office, I want to thank you for that. These people deserve that support. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Pete. And now I'd like to bring up two people that I just think are heroes. I've had a chance to, I didn't know either of these folks before this terrible tragedy occurred. I have to say it's been an honor to meet you. I'm sorry it's happened under this set of circumstances. You are true heroes, Jesse and Jessica Swift.
These are our notes, so we're not texting any friends or anything, if you're wondering what we're doing. Just being teachers, that's what we automatically assume when we see kids with phones out. But I want to introduce, this is my wife, Jessica, and I'm Jesse. And I'm sure most of you think that we're here tonight to talk about the event when 3 guys invaded our home. But that's not the story we want to talk about. That's not the story we want to choose to tell. We want to talk about the support and love that has gotten us through this dark time. We moved to Golden because we love the small town and, of course, of the great biking. But what we didn't realize that in this time of need, we'd find a community who'd help us through the toughest time in our life. From the police officers and city officials who have responded with true compassion, to our neighbors who helped us and supported us that night, to our colleagues who made sure our students were taken care of, to all the cyclists and bikers who have supported us in tons of different ways, to all the people around the world that have donated to us online and in person, and most importantly, to our family and friends who have been by our sides. And those acts of generosity have shown us that light will truly conquer dark. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
We cannot thank you enough for all the wonderful words, thoughtful gestures people have given us. Everyone has been incredible, from giving us meals, to visits, to phone calls and texts. They have touched both of us and our entire family, extended and our children, and show us what an amazing place we live in and the wonderful people we are truly surrounded by. Moving forward these next few weeks, we're kind of trying to just catch our breath and regroup. Every day's a little different. So some days we're ready to be out and about. Other days it's a little bit more difficult. We just ask your patience as we try and navigate this new time, as we're not sure exactly what we need to do to rebuild our lives and make sure our kids have support and space so that they can have a great and fun summer too. We're taking it day by day, but we know we're going to be okay. We are going to recover. We are going to trump through this. We are a family, and we have this amazing community, and an amazing community of strength and a lot of love, and we're not going anywhere. We love Golden, and this is where we want to be. So thank you to all of you, and thank you.
Thank you, Jesse and Jessica. I'm not sure I'd be able to stand up here and talk like that after going through what they've been through. Dr. Nicoletti.
My role tonight is just to talk a little bit about the psychological reactions of a violent incident. When you have a violent incident, there's two footprints that occur. One is the medical, and the other is the psychological footprint. So in this case, the medical footprint was Jesse being hurt and having to be hospitalized. Psychological footprint affected both of them, their kids, and the community. One of the biggest things that happens for them and for you all, first thing that happens in these type of events, our assumptions get shattered. Assumptions are things we have about how the world's supposed to operate. We form from childhood. Assumptions like our parents are supposed to take care of us. Assumptions like schools are safe places. When I send my children to school in the morning, they'll come back alive at the end of the day. Assumptions like movie theaters are safe places. You go there to be entertained. And assumptions like our house is a safe haven. Nothing bad can happen. And assumptions like nothing bad's going to happen to our mom or dad. So with this event, several things got shattered. And once assumptions get shattered, you have to figure out a way to rebuild it, because we can never rebuild it the same way. Like the chief says and Peter said, Golden's a very safe community. It's a great community. So I imagine there's several of you in the audience that were thinking, it would never happen here. This is a safe community. Well, it did, and it got shattered. So how do we make sense out of that? Once we have an assumption, we got to somehow rebuild it. I was on the scene of the Aurora Theater shooting, and there were folks there that night were going on, 4 years after? Their assumption the movie theaters are a safe place got shattered. We're 4 years later, and there are folks who could not go back to movie theater because they couldn't figure out a way to rebuild that assumption. And we need to have a rebuilding process. So for Jesse and Jessica, they have to figure out how to rebuild that assumption. You all in the community, especially those of you that geographically live close to them, you have to figure out how to rebuild that. And you're going to go through a battle between facts and feelings. The chief was saying, very accurately, that home invasions are a very low probability occurring event. So that's a fact. So that's your brain processing that. But inside in your heart are the feelings. And when the chief was saying that, some of you may be saying, yeah, but what if it does happen? So that's the battle that we go through, the battle between fact and feelings. And the main one we got to challenge is the feelings. Because, people could fill you full of facts, but if the feelings are saying, yeah, but, you'll always be living with apprehension from that standpoint. So, rebuilding the assumptions. Because what happened to you all is what we call too much, too ugly, too close. That's what this event was like. That's the psychological footprint of this event. The other thing that happens is our comfort zone gets shattered. We all have a comfort zone, and it's different sizes for all of us. So everything inside of our comfort zone we don't mind doing. Everything outside of our comfort zone we avoid. If we do it, it creates a lot of anxiety. So I bet you there's a few of you in here that have pretty big comfort zones. Like you like to bungee jump and race motorcycles and climb mountains and ski and scuba and on and on. So that's a pretty big comfort zone. Now there's some of you that may have a little smaller one. I like to ski and hike, but I don't think I'll go on Fear Factor and have them drop me in a vat of spiders. Would that be outside anybody's comfort zone here? Yeah, and it keeps getting smaller for people. You probably know folks who just go to work and come home. Then the smallest comfort zone are what we call in our world agoraphobics, people who won't leave their house. You can get a shift in your comfort zone with a traumatic event. What used to be comfortable, what used to be perceived as safe, is no longer comfortable or safe. our homes, that's the center of our comfort zone. And if our homes are invaded, where in the world can we be safe? So that's the struggle folks go through from that standpoint. How do I recover from that? How do I deal with it? The other interesting thing about comfort zones, even without a trauma, the tendency of our comfort zone is to shrink, to get smaller and smaller. Some of you may know that. If you've ever had parents or grandparents who used to be fairly active folks and then one day they retired and they stopped doing things, you probably noticed their world starting getting smaller and smaller. So it's a constant battle, keeping our comfort zone the same size or expanding it in day-to-day operations. And so you can imagine when a trauma occurs that it shatters it even more. So that's the things you all are struggling with right now, shattered assumptions and shattered comfort zone. The too much, too ugly, too close. Trying to make sense out of it. You can no longer say in the city of Golden, it will never happen here. That's gone forever for you all. But you have to come up with a saying, a thought process. And some of you know that already, like schools. Parents, we want our kids to be able to come home safe, but we know about Arapahoe High School, we know about Columbine, we know about Sandy Hook. And that never happened for some kids. They never did come back. But those of you who have children and sent your kids off to school, to Golden High or wherever they go, in order for you to do that, that tells me you rebuilt your assumption and you said something to yourself to allow you to let your kids go out. Maybe it's not going to happen here. More likely it's, the schools in Golden and Jeffco are very safe, so my kids are protected. Same thing with a movie theater. If you've gone to movie theater since July 20th, 2012, you've had to say to yourself something, because that world changed. So that's the challenge for everybody here is, what do we say to ourselves now to let us continue? How do we not let fear overcome us, consume us, and immobilize us? So those are some of the challenges. And part of that, and that's what the Golden officers are going to talk about in a couple minutes, is empowerment. There's two parts of our brain. There's a part of our brain that's kind of located here, and when it gets activated, it literally, and excuse me for my language because this is what happens, it's the anterior cingulate cortex. It's the part of the brain we call the oh shit part. You ever had that activated? Yeah. If that just keeps activating, you're only going to feel panic and fear. You got to activate a different part of the brain, and that's what the officers are going to talk about in a little bit. The part of the brain that is empowerment, the part of the brain that says, okay, what if somebody tries to get in our house? What are we going to do differently? How are we going to do it? That's a problem-solving approach. So as a community, that's what you need to do. How do we empower ourselves? How do we stay safe? How do we kind of deal with this, process through it? So again, I was just coming up here to talk a little bit about the psychological footprint and the feelings that Jesse and Jessica are going through and the feelings that many of you are going through. I'll open it up for questions, but I always know from doing these type of things, nobody wants to raise their hand. So I figured out a way to get folks to raise their hand. If you raise your hand, what you say is, I have a friend who asked me to ask this question. That being said, anybody have a friend that you wanted to ask a question for about what's going on? Yes?
I have a friend that asked me to ask this question. Are these people coming from out of state? Because all of a sudden there's a boost of crime.
I'm going to have to let the expert answer that one. Just a second.
In this particular case, these defendants were not from here. They were from another city in the metro area. In general, I can't speak about it because the crime of home invasion, as I said, is incredibly rare across the country in the state of Colorado in the metro area. These particular defendants were not from Golden.
Anybody else have a friend who has a question? One last thing. You hear a term called PTSD. People use it, post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of folks use it. Very few folks actually know what it is. So when an event like this occurs, the trauma part of our brain gets open. And the only way that can get open is you have to be a victim of or a responder or a neighbor of an event that involves death or injury. It's the only way you can develop the symptoms. You can't develop PTSD because the Broncos didn't go to Super Bowl one year. You're just being a whiner. That's not. So what happens when somebody has PTSD, without getting real technical, what it is they've gone through a traumatic event. So when you first go through it or when you're a neighbor of it and it happens close to you, you're consumed with it. You're thinking about it. You probably noticed that it was on your mind. So it's right there. It's a thought. So what we want trauma to do is go to our memory centers and have it become a memory. Unfortunately, with trauma is once you see something, you can never unsee it. Once you hear something, you can never unhear it. So the key thing about trauma survival is moving it to your memory center. So it's not consuming you, it's not interfering with your life. And unlike a lot of other stressors we deal with, general stress, you can go to the gym, you can go to a movie, you can do a variety of things. Trauma, the only way we get it to memory center is purging it. And there's really only 3 ways and only 2 ways work with adults. We can use one with little kids. Talking about it, writing about it, or with little kids, we can have them draw and crafts and things like that. But if you have no artistic skill, drawing an event isn't going to help you. Stick figures will not move it to your memory center. So that's the other thing about this community, talking about it. I know some people want to put it behind them. And that's okay if it's not in your thought process. If it's in your thought process, you didn't put it behind you. You're engaging in what we call denial. And it's going to come back and haunt you. So that's the purpose of why the Golden Police Department set this up, is giving the community an opportunity to hear things, talk about things, and also hear kind of and see Jesse and Jessica dealing with it. One of the things we find after trauma, you got 2 choices. You're either a victim of a home invasion or you're a survivor of a home invasion. And as you can hear from Jesse and Jessica talking, they're survivors. They weren't victims. They're carrying on. Thank you all.
Okay, now we're going to hear from Officer Page and Jodine Fowler. Officer Fowler.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Page. I'm a police officer with the Golden Police Department.
And I'm Jodine Feller, a police officer.
We're going to talk about a few things. First of all, I'd like to say that there are some crime recommendation checklists in the back through that doorway that you can pick up. It's really handy, kind of go through, look at your home, evaluate how you live, and see if there's things that you can improve. Any of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are not a criticism of how anybody lives their lives. These are just tips on what you can change to make yourself and your surroundings safer. In reality, the city of Golden is a very safe place, like everybody else has said. I've worked in other places. The crime rate here in the city of Golden is relatively low, so you guys live in a great city. The same recommendations that we're going to talk about here for home invasions are the same ones that are going to apply to burglaries, the same ones that are going to apply to elderly folks living a home alone by themselves, or women that live home alone by themselves. They all go hand in hand. So I'll talk a little bit about burglars. Burglars tend to work mostly during the day when the residence is more likely to be unoccupied, and that's because they don't want to run into anybody. They typically work alone and look for the right residence and the right opportunity to break into that home. They typically avoid a confrontation, and when they're approached, they'll run away. They don't want to get into a fight or a confrontation with you or your loved ones. Home invasions are very different. Like the chief and Dr. Nicoletti and the DA said, they're a very rare crime compared to other crimes. So you hear about them a lot because they're very traumatic and they get people's attention. You don't hear about all the burglaries that happen on a daily basis. You do hear about the home invasions, so that's why it sticks in the forefront of your mind. Typically, they work at night on the weekends because they want somebody to be at home, okay? Home invaders will sometimes target the resident as well as the home, for example, women living alone, for elderly folks that live alone or are wealthy, and then, of course, drug dealers. Those are just some examples. Home invaders use things like speed, surprise, and violence of action when they first come in your residence. For example, the first 60 seconds is typically when the greatest violence occurs. They're trying to overpower you and take charge of your residence. Home invaders do not typically work alone, so if you see one, you need to expect another one, all right? Burglars typically do not operate in more than just one person. The best defense is education and planning. So if you live alone, come up with a plan yourself, practice it. If you live with your loved ones or children or your parents, talk it over. Figure out what plan you're going to do. If something like this ever happens, you guys plan for if the power goes out, what are we going to do? Here's the flashlights, here's the candles, things like that. If you ever come home and you see the doors kicked in, don't go in the house. Get back in your car, walk away, call 911. The idea is to delay the burglar or the home invader, so we'll talk about hard targeting your residence compared to a soft target. Soft targets, when we talk about that, would be a house that's not locked or doesn't have an alarm system or has a weak locking system on it. Jodine, you want to take over?
So now we're going to talk about some of those ways to make those soft targets a little harder. Lighting can be an inexpensive and effective way to protect your property. Bad guys like to see, not be seen. Consider installing solid core doors, heavy-duty locks, and window secure devices. And then use them. Lock all doors, windows, and garages at all times. Use 4 3-inch screws to secure heavy-duty lock strike plates in the door frame. Install wide-angle peepholes. They're called 180-degree ones, and they're available in lots of places. They are simple to replace. And obviously, use the door peephole before opening the door. Use your porch light to help you see clearly outside. Never rely on a chain latch as a barrier to a partially open door. Never open the door to a stranger or solicitors. If you see solicitors, give us a call. Report suspicious behavior, not just people. Alert your neighbors to suspicious solicitors again. Hold a family meeting to discuss home safety plans. If you have an alarm, set it. Joe and I will be here afterwards. If you have any additional questions, we have the security survey out there. And if you're at all interested, we'll be more than happy to come by your house and either walk you through it or explain some of these things or give you additional suggestions. That's a more in-depth home security survey than the ones we handed out, but the ones out there are a great place to get started. My business cards are out there. There's lots of you here, so we would beg your indulgence in us getting to you if you would all like one. And please help us help you remain safe in this wonderful community. Thank you.
So folks, what I would tell you in closing, to reiterate one of their points, is this. In the 27 years I've worked for the police department, I'm in my 13th year as police chief, is this. People think we don't have crime in Golden. And we have some crime in Golden. And the biggest problem we have is convincing you, our citizens, to lock your doors and lock your cars. Crime here often is that of opportunity. And so please remember that. Perhaps the biggest tip we can give you is to lock your cars, lock your doors. That being said, Carlin Tilley, our Public Information Officer, wanted me to ensure that I tell you that survey that Officer Page and Officer Fowler are talking about will be on the city's website. It's cityofgolden.net. That the video of this presentation tonight has been recorded by the city, will be up sometime tomorrow on the city's website. So for anybody who didn't see it or found my presentation just incredibly exciting and wants to watch it again, you can go to the city's website. It'll be on, or on Channel 8, so you can see it there. We have a few more minutes to take any questions if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask. Yes, sir.
I was just curious, the opposite mentioned the difference between home burglaries that happen during the day, typically to unoccupied homes, versus home invasions that are usually in the evening or at night and target homes that do have occupants. I'm just curious why in the world anybody would intentionally target a home with occupants in it. I personally, I just found that surprising to me. I always figured home invasions were burglars who didn't expect people to be home and then fought them when they encountered them. Is that the case, or is it actually people?
Officer Page, answer that.
So when and we talk about their modus operandi, right? So if somebody's intentionally going out and they're going to be a home invader, or they're looking for a home to invade, they're looking for somebody to be there. They want to take you hostage. They want to hurt you. A lot of times home invaders, they will take naps in the homes. They'll sit down and they'll eat dinner while you sit there and watch. They will take you and your debit card and they'll take you for a ride to go get your money out of your bank account. They operate differently. A burglar, typically, just wants your stuff. They don't want to engage with anybody. They want to break in quietly, quickly, get what is of value, and leave before the cops ever get there. So a home invader, they know that your alarm system is probably not going to be set if you live at home, or if you're at home, right? So they know they don't have to deal with an alarm system. And if they act quickly, as soon as they come in that house and they overpower you, take you hostage, then they have your house. So it's a different mindset of the criminal that would create a home invasion compared to a burglary. So they're looking to commit sexual crimes, a number of other things. So they're just operating differently here. So basically, like if I walked up to you and robbed you at gunpoint compared to waiting for you to lay your phone down and I walked by and picked it up and ran off with it, because I don't want to engage with you. So. Oh, go ahead, sir.
The home invader is addicted to what we call the thrill of the thought. And the thrill of the thought is having power over you and controlling everything. Like Joe was saying, you're watching them eat, you're watching them abuse everybody in your house. So it's all about the thrill of the thought. That's why they do that. I know, it doesn't make sense.
And lastly, they may also want access to something that's in your house that they can only get because you're there. So maybe you have a safe, and they need to get into that. The only way they can get into it is by getting you to open the safe, one example. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is the present DA going to use prosecution against people who defend themselves in home invasions or theft?
No. qualified.
Of course, he's a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer. Have you ever heard a lawyer have a one-word answer? Absolutely not. There's obviously the Make My Day law that citizens have a right to defend themselves and defend their property if, in fact, they feel threatened within their home. And that is an absolute defense to what happens in the home. There are extraordinary circumstances under which there might be some sort of culpability, but that's very, very difficult to imagine. So as a lawyer, you never say never on things, but as a general practice, a homeowner does have the right to use reasonable force when that homeowner feels that they are threatened or in danger.
Yes, ma'am?
Is there a way for us to keep up with the investigation? Is there like an information place where we can go to follow this? As a neighbor, really want to know what's happening.
Well, that's a question for the DA now, because the way the process works is once the case is filed with the district attorney, all information on the case comes out of the district attorney's office. So I'm not sure what their process is for doing that.
In the second row here is Pam Russell, the Public Information Officer for the DA's office. Why don't you stand up, Pam, and I'll throw that question to you. What's the best way for us to get word out with respect to when hearings are set? And it's a great point. It's a great point because these are all public hearings, and you are entitled and have a right to be present at any and all of the hearings associated with this case or any criminal case. It's your courthouse. These are your courtrooms. So you have the absolute right to be there. Pam, what do you think is the best way to get notice to the community of upcoming events?
So at this stage, when official action is taken, and the charging is the most recent official action, there was a press release that was written and sent out, and it's on our website, and so it's there for anyone to see. From this point forward, however, we won't really be doing regular news releases until, again, there's some significant change in the case. So my phone number, though, is public, and anyone can call me at any time. The only thing we would be able to tell you, though, is the date and the place of the next hearing. So at this point, information from the investigation, we have to be very careful with that, as Pete was describing, our ethical requirements to protect the case. But if you are interested in what date and time and place the next hearing is, you're certainly welcome to call me. And I don't know, some people have a pencil. Do people still carry pencils? 303-271-6905. And if you just Google District Attorney, there's a number on there they can get you to me. And again, I'm Pam Russell. Okay?
Sir?
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any possibility that the juvenile involved is going to be prosecuted as an adult.
That decision is still being determined. There have been discussions about that. I was at a meeting last week with the district attorney's office where that very discussion was had, but they've made no final decision on that. Juvenile was within 6 weeks of his 18th birthday, so they're still making, there's lots of discussions about that. And any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
I was wondering, I know the press or the web said that the person that's still at large has a national, there's a warrant for him nationally?
Yes, there is.
What is that warrant for?
The same charges as the DA told you about before, attempted second-degree murder, burglary, and yes, ma'am, it is. All of them have similar charges on them except the female driver, and I think there's some different charges on her. Is that right, Pete? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I greatly appreciate it. This is a wonderful community. I love living here, love working here, and as shown by your willingness to come out and spare some time. So thank you for coming, and have a wonderful rest of the night.
know, I Google it.